Well, welcome to 2025. We've made it a quarter of the way through the century, and man, it's been pretty difficult. You think about it, the century started with, pretty quickly 9/11. We've had COVID, we've had all kinds of major world upheavals. Yet here we are, the world's still ticking. Jesus hasn't come back yet. So, congratulations as we walk into a new year. Over the course of these, so what you can expect from Let's Parent on Purpose in 2025. I intend to release 2 episodes a month. Most of them are going to be interviews. This one is going to be a solo episode as we get started. Because there was a book that I read. I read about 30 to 35 books in 2024. That's pretty normal for me. A lot of them are fiction and completely mindless. Some of them are nonfiction. And to be honest, by the time I finished the book, I have no idea what I read. I can't remember a single thing from it. And then there are a few that really stand out to me. And today I want to share with you one of the books I actually just recently finished towards the end of 2024. It's a fairly new release. I believe it came out in 2024 or maybe late 2023. And the book is not by a Christian. It's the guy is clearly a non-believer who wrote it, but it was on such a pertinent subject. And I don't think I could actually get him on for an interview because now the book is a New York Times bestseller. But there's some information in there that I think is really vital for us moms and dads to hear. So the book is called The Anxious Generation: How the Great Rewiring of Childhood is Causing an Epidemic of Mental Illness. The author is Jonathan Haidt. He is I believe he's a psychologist, sociologist from New York University. And he catalogs. He began to do a research project where I think he was specifically just initially looking at girls and Instagram or something like that, the effect of Instagram on girls. And as they began to research, he realized the subject is much, much deeper, that something radically significant has happened in the last 10 to 13 years, really 2010, and then especially starting in about 2013, and another major jump in 2017, where we have a generation who are experiencing childhood in a radically different way than what any of us ever have. Now, I'm a Gen Xer. I'm late in the Gen X game. I was born in 1977. And so I grew up with television. I remember when I was really little, I was the remote control for the house because I was the youngest in the house, and there were like 4 channels, 5 channels. But I remember getting cable TV. I remember my first video game system was an Atari, and then in television and Nintendo. So we certainly grew up with technology, but it was a fairly limited technology, comparatively speaking. Now, compared to my grandma, it was out of this world, amazing space age technology. But compared to what my children and what your children are growing up in, we lived in a much simpler technological generation. So, what Jonathan Haidt and his associates, as they began to research, were seeing was that starting around 2010, and then especially, a spike in 2013 and 2017, major differences in the rates of diagnosed anxiety, depression, suicide rates, especially among young girls, and just generally mental health diagnoses in general were skyrocketing. And when I say skyrocketing, for instance, this is the USA National Survey on Drug Use in Health. So this is a not a Christian survey and not just specifically for his book. Major depression among teens from 2004. In about 2004, about 13% of teenage girls and about 5% of teenage boys were diagnosed with major depression. So that's significant, but pretty low. In 2020 to 2022, around 30% of teenage girls and 10 to 15% of teenage boys were diagnosed with major depression. So 1 in 3 teenage girls and basically 1 in 10 to 2 in 10 teenage boys diagnosed with major depression. In college ages, the amount, this is from like 2010 to 2022, US college students diagnosed with a mental illness, anxiety and depression specifically, rose from about 10% to 25% just in a 10 to 15 year period. And so we are parenting a generation that is experiencing growing up, experiencing childhood radically different than what we did. And again, this, I'm telling you, this book, I would highly recommend you read it, Anxious Generation. He's not a believer, but it was incredible how many surprisingly spiritual insights this guy, who is an evolutionist and I believe an atheist or an agnostic based on what he said in the book, was realizing. And so I want to just highlight, I don't want to go through the whole book. I want to highlight, first off, what seemed to be the causes. And then secondly, what seemed to be some really practical solutions as we think about our children. And I want to do this in a shorter time. If you're really interested in the book, you can get the audio book, you can get the actual book, or find Jonathan Haidt on a podcast. But let me give you a summary. So within 10, 15 minutes, you're going to know whether you want to explore this more. So what are the key contributing factors to this rise in anxiety, depression, mental illness? From 2010 to 2024, what happened in that time? Well, it's real simple. The first iPhone came out very late 2009, 2010. 2013, I believe, was when the first social media platforms began to be available on a phone. So this was Facebook. I think this was the very early iterations of Instagram. And then around 2017 is when Facebook and Instagram and Snapchat and these other social media platforms, they went from giving you a chronological time feed to an algorithm-based time feed, and they added the like button and I believe the share button, or whatever their version of the like button was. And so what happened with this, you had a few different iterations. Number one, instead of a phone being plugged into a wall, or what many millennials grew up with, which was a flip phone, which was good for phone calls and texting, now you have a completely immersive product. You're carrying around a supercomputer in your pocket. And so instead of the phone becoming a tool that you use for certain utilities, phones began to be people's worlds. And one of the ironic things that Jonathan Haidt points out is that a lot of times we feel like our phone is helping us with social connection, when in reality what's happening is that young people are socially interacting far less than they ever have before. And this is obvious. If you go to any place where there's a number of young people, generally, even when they're with one another, their heads are buried in their phones. And you can say, well, they're with one another and they're experiencing the same things. But what they find is that human beings, especially in their childhood years, their brains wire through face-to-face contact. And so when we are together and we are, looking at our phones, even if we're looking at faces on our phones, it's not the same thing. The other thing that was obviously happening with social media, the algorithms tend to bump up things. Basically, algorithms are looking for things that you're looking at more. So the way these work, as you're scrolling through your phone, whatever you pause on, even if it's for an eighth of a second, 3 seconds, whatever, your social media stream is noticing that. And it's logging, oh, you paused on that more. So we're going to feed you things that are like that more. And so what are things that people pause on? Things that are outrageous or things that are scantily clad. And so what ends up happening is the more that you're on your phone, the more that you use your phone, and this is especially true for young people, it tends to start feeding them more and more with things that are looking perfect and scantily clad, or things that are shocking and outrageous. And we know that this is a false social world. We know that Instagram is not true. It's not reality. Snapchat is not true. TikTok is not true. TikTok is just a tool of the Chinese government to destroy our minds, I think, and harvest the data from your phone. But what the difference is, as an adult, my brain is generally wired already, although I can tell a difference in my phone. With a child, their brain is being wired by the interaction on the phone. And so what are we seeing? We're seeing that up to a third of teenage girls have some kind of major anxiety or depression right now. And it corresponds directly with the propagation of smartphones, propagation of social media, and especially when now you can record like buttons and not. So now if I'm a kid and I post something, I'm not just satisfied posting it. The satisfaction comes with how many people like my post. And so you tend to do more outrageous things to get people to like your post. Or you see other people who, with their hyper filtered lives and hyper filtered world, are getting more attention than you. So this, especially for girls, plays a radical impact on their psyche, on their wiring, on their sense of wellness and wellness and well-being. So let me back up a little bit, and I'm giving you some reactions, the things that I really took away from the book. One is that there is absolutely a direct correlation with the amount of time that a young person is on a phone, the age that a young person is given a phone, and especially the age that they enter into social media. And so it seems like, and I'll get to some of the remedies here in just a minute, but there was a whole nother aspect that was a non-phone aspect that that as they researched, they began to discover was also majorly playing into the rise of anxiety of this generation. And it goes all the way back to childhood. Now, in childhood, that one of the most important things that can happen for you as a child is that you get free time to play. You need oodles and oodles of free time to play. Honestly, preschool and kindergarten in those first couple years, the most important educational thing that's happening to you is your free chances to interact and play with other kids, learning how to socialize, learning to creatively do things, learning to problem solve, and not having it hyper supervised and not having it hyper structured for you. So kids need gobs and gobs and gobs of time of unstructured play. And what has happened over the last, it's really been growing. So it's not just the last 10 years or 15 years. It's been more than that. What has happened is that children's playtime is becoming more and more structured and more supervised. And so what Jonathan Hayden and the researchers noticed is that there's this weird twofold thing happening. Parents are giving their children more and more freedom in the digital world, and they're giving them less and less freedom in the actual real world. And there's this terrifying thought that everybody has that there's some kind of stalker out on every street corner. There's some kind of kidnapper, some kind of child molester that's going to be out in public, that's going to take your kid, kidnap them, do terrible things to them. And what they find is, realistically speaking, there's less of that happening in the real world than ever, because child predators, stalkers, perverts, all of that don't need to go to the park. They don't need to go to the street corner because they can go to the phone. All they have to do is get on social media apps and pretend to be a 13-year-old, pretend to be a 14-year-old, pretend to be a girl when they're a 40-year-old man. So the true dangers have migrated to the digital world, and parents are giving their children more and more freedom, unsupervised freedom in the digital world, when real mental health and growth and learning that you have what it takes happens in the physical world, and kids are getting less and less opportunity to do that. And even if the kids are really physically active, a lot of times they're really active because they have this sport, and then they have this band practice, and then they have this karate thing. And so their life is hyper structured, and they don't have that freedom to explore. So what ends up happening with this, what they're finding is that the kids don't learn natural problem solving. They don't learn that they have what it takes. They need somebody to show them how to do stuff, somebody to bail them out. And as they get older, they become extremely anxious at things that should be pretty normal problems to solve. Now, as a youth pastor, I've seen this happen. I've seen kids who just seem to be paralyzed over issues that should not be that big of an issue. It seemed to really, it's funny because sometimes it's very, very intelligent kids. And as soon as they encounter something they're not good at, they melt. Why? Well, there's a lot of reasons why. So I'm giving you generalities. And the generalities seem to be too much time of hyper-structured, hyper-supervised childhood, and too much time with that. Not enough time of unsupervised play, free time to explore, to roam, to create your own games, to create your own rules, to figure out they don't work, to socially interact, to get, where kids are mad at you and then you have to problem solve. Not enough time to do that. And then oodles and oodles and oodles of time on a hyper interactive screen that is not the real world, that detaches kids from true problem solving, true face-to-face interaction, and true reality. So that's big picture. Big picture, what's causing the super rise of our anxious generation? It is over-structured, over-supervised play as a child, and then unstructured, unsupervised, vast amounts of time in the digital world. And so Jonathan Haidt gives 4 recommendations. I'm going to see if I can remember all 4 off the top of my head that are big cultural remedies. So these will work in your house, but they will work more if you can get a group of people willing to do them together. So 4 cultural remedies that he thinks could have a massive impact. So number 1 is radically increase the time of unstructured play that your kids have in their childhood years up through, their 14, 15-year-old years. So elementary, late elementary, middle school. Let them play. Let them go outside. Let them explore. Let them problem solve where you're not creating the game, where they're not always on a coach team. So they need more of that with much more restriction and supervision on the digital world. And then these are the mile markers that he recommends. He recommends no phones before high school, and then no social media before 16 years old, because around 16 years old seems to be one of those wiring points where if you can delay the interaction of social media until after 16, then you're really doing a huge favor for your kids. So, as we go along, we're on our 2nd and 3rd out of 4 children with phones. We end up giving our kids phones in 8th grade. Through circumstances that, I wasn't planning on it, but that's what happened. But we have delayed social media. So I think our daughter, it was around 15 years old or so. And even then it was Pinterest. So I think it was 16 or 17 before she really got into Instagram or anything like that. And with our sons, we've taken an even harder stance just because we're learning as we go. So they have their phones, but they have no access to social media. And I kind of did a deal with them. I said, we don't want this. We think that it's an investment in your life to not have this. And so here's the trade-off. I'm going to open up an investment account, a stock account for each of you. And I'm going to put some money into that stock account. And it's just you're going to do nothing, and it's going to grow over the next few years of your life. And if you want social media before 17 years old, you owe me the entire amount that I paid into your stock exchange. So it's going to financially cost you money to do it, because I think that you're going to be much better off without it. So our boys like free money, and they didn't have social media, so they're cool with it. And it's also been helpful because there's other friends and family that we're involved with that also don't have social media, so they don't feel like they're the only one. So again, this is one that's really helpful in a group. So I've given you 3. Let me review the 3. Much more unsupervised play as a child. Number 2, no phone before 9th grade. And so no phone before high school. And so if you truly do need your kid to have a phone, get them a flip phone. Like if you need access because they're in middle school and transportation and stuff, get them a flip phone, or give them something that's literally a brick aside from phone calls and perhaps texting. And even that's limited. Maybe you want to let them have music on as well. but hyper limit what that phone can do. And then no social media until at least 16 years old. And I would encourage you, make challenges to see if they'll go beyond that. I do think it's healthy. And if they're going to have social media, I think by their junior or senior year, it's healthy to let them explore that in your house while you're still there to navigate it. But if you can get them that long, I think before they jump into social media, it's good to have a conversation with them of like, what do you really feel like you're missing out? And what do you see that this has done in your friends and in their lives and their relationships? And is this something you really want to add to your life? And so maybe that delay will give some wisdom. The fourth thing, and this is one where as a parent, you don't have a lot of individual control, but culturally do what you can to influence. No phones in schools. And so living in the state of Florida, I haven't yet figured out if this is a county rule or a statewide rule. But this past year in my children's schools, in their public schools, there's a no phone policy. So your phone must stay in your backpack, zipped up, turned off, locked up until school is over. So you can't have it during class, but you can't have it between classes as well. And what they find educationally is this radically improves the educational experience of kids. And as parents, we might say, well, what if I need to get a hold of them? Well, what did your parents do when they needed to get a hold of you when you're in the middle of third period in high school? Call the office if you really need to, or realize you probably don't need to get a hold of them as much as you do. So those are four solutions. And I'll tell you, each of them is challenging. Each of them might include some risk on your behalf. But I think that I see it dead on. And again, this is wisdom from a non-believer, but I think it's what I would call good godly wisdom. The fact that we need to be protective shepherds of our kids in a digital world, walk wisely in a fool's world. He who walks with the wise becomes wise, and a companion of fools suffers harm. And so if you let your kids have unmitigated access to phones and social medias, you're just letting them be a companion of fools, and they will suffer harm. The unsupervised play and childcare, there's some real wisdom to it. And obviously you're going to have to think through your situation, pray through it, give boundaries and parameters, but let your kids explore. Let them know that they have what it takes. Again, this is so much easier to do if you're in a church community, if you're with other like-minded parents. I know it can be very hard if you're in a split situation where you're co-parenting with, maybe you're separated or you're divorced. It's really hard when you have two rules in two different houses. So maybe read this book together with the other parent of your child and just say, hey, this is something I've come across. Can we read it and then discuss a strategy? And then I would just finally encourage you, don't be afraid of making your kids angry or hurting their feelings. Be more afraid of the long-term damage and harm if you don't do anything than the short-term damage of them being angry. And I understand they can open a social media account on their friend's phone. There's a lot of ways that kids can get around stuff, but you can do your due diligence, right? You can do what you can. And even if they have that social media account on somebody else's phone, or they're accessing it elsewhere, that's unhealthy. It's sneaky. It's rebellious, but it's still much harder for them to get to than if they have unmitigated access to it day and night on their own phone in their house. So, just let's aim to protect our kids. Let's walk in wisdom. Remember, we're the first generation parenting kids with supercomputer, hyper interactive smartphones in their pockets. So we're going to make mistakes. And if you've made mistakes, if you've already given this stuff to your kids early, walk in grace. Have conversations with them on what you're learning and what you would try to do, and see if you can help bring them on the same team. So don't just use the stick, use the carrot. Seek to reward them, seek to replace with other things that would be healthy. So that's, again, maybe I saved you reading Anxious Generation, but I think it was well worth my time and effort, especially the first half of it. So I hope this is helpful to you. And I would love your feedback. jay@lessparentonpurpose.com. Send me an email and give me your experience or what you have done in your household to help set up safeguards. And if it's really helpful, I'll pass it along to everybody else in my Things for Thursday email, which you can get by signing up text the word things to 66866. That's things to 66866. And I will put you on my, I'll give you a bunch of free resources, and each week send out things that I like that have helped me in my walk with Jesus, my parenting, or just things that I find interesting. So great to be with you today. Look forward to a wonderful 2025. God bless you, keep you, and may his face shine upon you.